Thomas Eugene Creech is an American serial unaliver who was convicted of 2 unalivings committed in 1974 and sentenced to unaliving in Idaho. The sentence was reduced 2 years later on appeal to life imprisonment. He was sent back to Idaho's death row for a 1981 unaliving committed while in prison. Creech personally confessed to a total of 42 unalivings in various states, some of which allegedly involved the Hells Angels and the Church of Satan. Most of his additional confessions are uncorroborated, but police believe strong evidence links Creech to 7 additional unaliving victims, in 2 of which he was convicted. In January 2024, an investigation by the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department concluded that Creech unalived Daniel A. Walker in what was a cold case. As of 2024, Creech was the longest-serving death row inmate in the state. His execution, originally scheduled for the 28th of February 2024, resulted in a failed attempt and was cancelled. He remains on death row. His new execution date of the 13th of November 2024 has been scheduled, but on the 6th of November, a federal judge halted his execution to allow for legal challenges. Creech was born on the 9th of September 1950 in Hamilton, Ohio. He grew up in an unstable household where his parents frequently argued with each other, eventually leading to a divorce. Creech was left to live with his father, who years later would pass away from unclear causes right in front of him. At the time, he claimed to have attacked the nurse who had attended to his father. The next few years of Creech's life are difficult to verify as they're interwoven with hearsay and his own uncorroborated claims. From what little can be definitively confirmed, he ran away from his hometown and became a drifter, travelling cross-country. On the 11th of December 1969, he was sentenced to a 2 to 50-year prison term for unarmed robbery. He was paroled in 1971. In 1973, then aged 23, he married 17-year-old Thomasine Lauren White of Boise, Idaho, who allegedly became a participant in at least one of his unalivings. She was eventually moved to a psychiatric hospital in Salem, Oregon, where she subsequently committed self-unaliving. In a letter that Creech sent to KIVI-TV decades later after the fact, he claimed that his wife had been arred by a gang of men and then thrown out of a window, causing her debilitating physical and mental injuries that were the primary contributors for her decision to end her life. On the 22nd of August 1973, he brokered the conditions of his parole by allegedly stealing 13 cartons of cigarettes in Portland. The charges were dropped after he was admitted to a psychiatric hospital for a mental evaluation. He was housed in an open ward and was described as a model patient during his short stay, being released only a week later and after it was determined he didn't suffer from any mental illnesses. He then moved back to Portland where he found a job as a sexton of the St. Mark's Episcopal Church. He then later quit his job after the body of a man was found in his living quarters. Shortly thereafter, him and his new girlfriend, 17-year-old Carol Spaulding, would move to Idaho. On the 6th of November 1974, Creech and Spaulding were hitchhiking in Idaho from Lewiston south to Donnelly when a 1956 model Buick Century operated by 2 house painters, 34-year-old Edward Thomas Arnold and 30-year-old John Wayne Bradford, picked them up. Along the way, Creech pulled out a rifle and shot both of them in the head, then hid their bodies in a barrow pit along Highway 55 in Valley County near Donnelly, north of Cascade. Their bodies and blood-spattered car were found the next day. In the meantime, Creech had befriended a 26-year-old named Gene Alvin Hilby, who later agreed to bury the rifle at his behest, unaware that it was a murder weapon. 2 days after the unalivings, after Creech was proposed as a suspect in 2 additional unalivings in Oregon and for his supposedly sending unaliving threats to the newly elected Colorado Senator Gary Hart, he and Spaulding were arrested in Glens Ferry in Elmore County by police officer Bill Hill, who had been notified that they were fugitives and wanted for unaliving. While both of them were arraigned on unaliving charges, Creech was cleared of his supposed involvement in their unaliving threats, as it was determined that it was just rumours that spread from a police officer, one of Hart's campaign managers, and a prosecutor. Briefly held at the Valley County Jail in Cascade, Creech was transferred 90 miles south to a more secure Ada County Jail in Boise. About a week after his arrest, Creech attempted to commit unaliving by slashing his wrists with a broken piece of mirror, but managed only a minor injury before being restrained by prison guards and moved to another cell. Hilby, the man who had buried the supposed unaliving weapon and had originally also been charged with participating in the unaliving, was later released on probation after pleading guilty to hindering with an unaliving case. In January 1975, it was decided that the now 18-year-old Spaulding would be tried as an adult on 2 counts of first-degree unaliving. Creech continued to cause trouble even after his arrest. On the 16th of June, he attacked and injured his cellmate William O. Fisher during an altercation. Fisher had to be driven to the hospital for his facial injuries, but no further information is available about the incident itself due to a gag order being placed on the case. A month later, Creech attempted to sue the Idaho statesman for supposedly violating his right to a fair trial by publishing information on other crimes he was either convicted or suspected of, thus possibly prejudicing the public against him. In August, shortly after a change of venue from Cascade to Wallace in Shoshone County was accepted, Creech was sent to the hospital for stitches after suffering injuries caused from falling out of his bunk bed in his cell and hitting his head. In October, it was ruled that an alleged confession in which Creech, who initially claimed that he was not near the unaliving site, says that he had shot and unalived the two men after they pulled out a knife and threatened to ask Spaulding, could be admitted as evidence in the upcoming trial. After taking the stand at his trial in October 1975, Creech shocked the entire nation when he readily admitted his responsibility in 42 unalivings in nearly a dozen states. He alleged that the first unaliving occurred when he was 17 and drowned a friend in New Miami, Ohio. In his confession, Creech claimed that he had unalived a gay man in San Francisco in 1965. After running away from home, he later unalived 5 people in Ohio in contact unalivings while he was with the Hells Angels, and later began unaliving people in satanic rituals involving human sacrifices. In total, he claimed to know of such unalivings that occurred in Burien, Washington, San Diego, San Francisco and Malibu, California, Beaver, Ogden and Salt Lake City, Utah, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Jackson Hole, Wyoming, Missoula, Montana, Wichita, Texas, and another city in Colorado. He also directed the authorities to 2 alleged burial grounds in Los Angeles County, where he claimed that they could locate 100 victims, but the searchers only turned up a cow bone. While his confessions were shocking, authorities considered most of them to be bogus, with one officer saying that his recitation of the had been copied word from an issue of Playboy. Nonetheless, they were able to link him to the unalivings of 9 victims in total, none of whom were unalived in supposed Gordon Lee Stanton and Charles Thomas Miller in Las Vegas, Nevada, 22-year-old William Joseph Dean, the man whose body was found in his church living quarters in Portland, Oregon, 19-year-old Salem store clerk Sandra Jane Ramsamug, who was unalived not long after Dean, 22-year-old Riogley Stewart Mackenzie near Braggs, Wyoming, and 50-year-old Vivian Grant Robinson in Sacramento, California. Among his credible victims was 70-year-old retiree Paul C. Schrader, who was stabbed at unaliving in an apparent robbery at the Downtown Motor Hotel in Tucson, Arizona, on the 23rd of November 1973. Creech, who at the time was working as a cook in the El Bambi Cafe in Beaver, Utah, was later arrested for disorderly conduct and identified as a suspect after a routine police check revealed that he was wanted for Schrader's unaliving. Creech and Thomasine White were charged with the unaliving, but the pair was acquitted only hours after deliberation. Creech pleaded guilty in the 1974 unaliving of William Joseph Dean in Portland, Oregon. Creech was also convicted of the unaliving of Vivian Grant Robinson in Sacramento, California. He has 5 unaliving convictions in total. Just days before the rejection of his clemency plea in 2024, Creech was found to be the true perpetrator behind the unsolved unaliving of Daniel Walker in San Bernardino, California in October 1974. While he was now considered a self-admitted serial unaliver, Creech continued to profess his innocence in the Arnold Bradford murders. The jury took a few days of deliberations in order to return a guilty verdict to the case due to his confusing circumstances. His attorney, with assistance of a private investigator, John Wickersham, sought to interview additional witnesses in order to have the conviction overturned. 5 months later, on the 25th of March 1976, Creech was sentenced to unaliving by hanging for the 2 unalivings. Originally set for the 21st of May, his execution was stayed pending appeals, with Creech willingly offering to stand trial for some of his unalivings in Oregon and California. He will later be convicted of these unalivings, but his exact sentence is unknown. As a result of the 1976 Supreme Court ruling Gregg v. Georgia, which led to changes in the death penalty sentencing, one of Creech's attorneys, Bruce Robinson, sought to have his client's death sentence commuted to life imprisonment, citing that a sentence violated the state's then illegitimate death penalty statute. Robinson's strategy proved to be a success, as Creech's sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment. Robinson additionally petitioned for Creech to be freed altogether but was unsuccessful. Creech was housed in the Idaho State Correctional Institution east of Kuna. He worked as a janitor in the prison despite the protests of 2 prosecutors, who warned the wardens that he still posed a threat even to other inmates. Their fears were realised on the 13th of May 1981 when 23-year-old David Dale Jensen, a car thief who had previous altercations with Creech, was unalived by Creech with a sock stuffed with batteries. There are 2 theories over the unaliving which Creech himself changed at different points in time. The first theory was that Jensen attempted to attack Creech using the sock of batteries. The second theory, which Creech claimed at his 1980 sentencing hearing, involved different inmates offering to pay Creech for killing Jensen since he was not well liked in the prison. In that scenario, Creech, through an intermediary, gave Jensen weapons to attack Creech to justify killing Jensen, essentially setting up Jensen to be killed. Regardless of the pretext of the murder, Creech managed to take a hold of the sock and started beating Jensen with it, repeatedly bashing and kicking at his head, causing Jensen's death. Jensen, who was a car thief, was disabled, which impaired his ability to adequately protect himself in prison. Charged with first-degree murder, he changed his plea to guilty and was sentenced to death. The sentencing judge acknowledged that Creech when balancing the aggravating and mitigating factors, however, the judge also identified 5 aggravating factors and stated that with concluding that the murder and the took He asked the victim's father for forgiveness and stated that his wish to be executed as he didn't want to die in solitary confinement. However, Creech has since changed his mind, having appealed his sentence for Jensen's murder for over 40 years. Since his second death sentence, Creech has been on death row, now housed at the Idaho Maximum Security Institution, where he is also the longest-serving inmate. One of the prosecutors at his original trial, Jim Harris, later said in an interview that he wished Creech to be taken off death row as he considered that his case had cost the taxpayers too much for an execution that possibly may never happen. In 2020, Creech and another death row inmate, Gerald Pizzuto, filed a federal lawsuit in which they claimed their rights were violated by the state's secrecy surrounding the execution protocol. The lawsuit was thrown out by the U.S. District Court Judge David Nye, citing their ongoing appeals at the time as a prime factor of why it has no current standing. On the 12th of October 2023, Judge Jason D. Scott signed Creech's death warrant, setting his execution date for the 8th of November 2023. On the 18th of October, the Idaho Commission of Pardons and Parole announced they would delay Creech's execution date after they granted a request from Creech for a commutation hearing, making Creech the 3rd death row prisoner of Idaho's legal history to be given a clemency hearing. On the 29th of January 2024, the Idaho Pardon and Parole Board deadlocked 3-3 on whether to grant Creech clemency. As the vote to grant clemency was not a majority, the death sentence was upheld. Governor Brad Little, who was the ultimate authority on whether to grant clemency in the capital case, chose not to grant Creech clemency. On the 30th of January 2024, Judge Jason D. Scott again signed a death warrant setting Creech's execution for the 28th of February 2024. After the death warrant was issued, Creech filed 2 appeals. One was to call for another clemency review on the grounds that it was made in the absence of his 7th parole board member, who backed out prior to the vote, and that his participation was required to ensure a fairer outcome for Creech's clemency hearing, while another was to declare his death sentence, which was handed to him by a judge and not a jury, as unconstitutional. On the 9th of February 2024, the Idaho State Supreme Court dismissed Creech's pleas, and its execution was set to occur on the 28th of February 2024. The Idaho governor also declared publicly that he had no intention to spare Creech of the punishment due to the magnitude of his crimes. The 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals from California also rejected Creech's appeal on the 23rd of February 2024. Creech's lawyers sought to have the death sentence overturned on the grounds that it was unconstitutionally imposed by a judge and not a jury, but the judges admonished his lawyers for not raising the issue earlier without providing credible evidence to substantiate their claims. They then described his motion as an act of delay for the sake of delaying execution. Jensen's family publicly opposed the clemency plea of Creech, stating that Jensen was a and Jensen's daughter, who was 4 when her father died, stated that she never got to know her father and felt aggrieved that Creech was still alive even after years since her father was murdered. Creech's supporters continued to advocate for communication in his death sentence to life imprisonment on the grounds that Creech had reformed and was no longer a threat to society despite the enormity of his crimes. On the 28th of February 2024, Creech's execution was set to proceed. However, 1 hour past the designated 10 a.m. execution time, it was announced that the medical team had failed to successfully establish an intravenous line for the lethal injection drug. The execution was called off and Creech was escorted back to his cell. On the 16th of October 2024, a new death warrant was issued for Creech, rescheduling him to be executed on the 13th of November 2024. On the 6th of November, a federal judge granted Creech a stay of execution to allow legal challenges to be filed against the execution protocol.